Compañeras y compañeros, I want to tell you, to bring you the warmest revolutionary greetings to this meeting of the Partido Obrero Tendencia.
Quiero traerles los saludos revolucionarios más cálidos a esta reunión del Partido Obrero Tendencia.
And together with all the greetings of my comrades, of the working class in Greece, and of all the poor in struggle in this moment of the class struggle.
Y los saludos de todos los trabajadores y de todos los pobres y oprimidos y la clase obrera de Grecia y de todos los sectores en lucha.
In this short greeting, I want to make some introductory remarks before the video.
Quiero hacer unos comentarios introductorios antes del video.
Our party, the EK, the Workers' Revolutionary Party of Greece, together the working class and the class struggle unions, we will celebrate the May Day next week, the May the 6th, with a general strike and demonstrations all over the country against the right-wing government.
Nosotros, desde el Partido Revolucionario de Grecia, junto a la clase obrera y a los sindicatos en lucha, vamos a festejar este 1 de mayo, el próximo 6, con una huelga general.
It is not a general strike like in the previous years.
No es una huelga general como en años anteriores.
We face a very right-wing reactionary government.
Enfrentamos a un gobierno de derecha
in a country which is the most bankrupt country in Europe.
En un país que es el país en más bancarrota de toda Europa.
More than 200, the debt of the country is more than 200% from the GDP.
La deuda del país es del 200% del PBI.
And the pandemic makes a hell this country.
Y la pandemia está causando estragos, hace de este país un infierno.
At that moment we have the greatest rate of deaths in the European Union in relation to our population.
En este momento tenemos la mayor cantidad de deuda en relación a nuestra población en toda Europa.
And
Perdón, de muertes.
Yeah.
Cantidad de muertes.
At that moment, the right-wing government wants to introduce a new legislation forbidding strikes, forbidding trade union activity, forbidding all the freedoms that we won in the fight against the military dictatorship many years ago.
Y en este momento nuestro gobierno de derecha intenta introducir legislación en contra de las huelgas, las movilizaciones y derechos que adquirimos superando dictaduras militares.
So what we say to them, it is no pasarán. Okay?
Lo que les decimos es que no pasarán.
And in the last 2-3 months in Greece, we have an increased intervention of the mass movement in the streets and in occupations.
Tenemos un ascenso del movimiento de masas y de las ocupaciones en Grecia.
And this is a part of the change in the world situation. It's not just a Greek phenomenon.
Y esto es parte de la situación mundial, no es solamente un fenómeno griego.
This is a point that I want to stress.
Este es un punto que quiero remarcar.
Even the US President Joe Biden recognizes that we face an inflection point of history, as he said in the US Congress 2 days ago.
Incluso el presidente de Estados Unidos, Biden, reconoce que estamos ante un punto de inflexión, como lo reconoció en el Congreso que se hizo hace pocos días.
Because of this perfect storm of the pandemic, of the COVID-19 pandemic, combined with a huge global capitalist bankruptcy.
por esta tormenta perfecta que significa la combinación de la pandemia con la gran crisis capitalista mundial y su bancarrota.
The pandemic is not just a factor which accelerated the global capitalist crisis which erupted after 2008.
La pandemia no es solo un factor que aceleró la crisis mundial que se había abierto en el 2008.
It is not true, it is not right to say that only that the pandemic makes things worse, makes the crisis worse than it was before.
No es correcto afirmar que la pandemia solamente hace de la crisis algo peor.
We have a qualitative change in the world situation from last year.
Tenemos un cambio cualitativo en la situación con respecto al año pasado.
The pandemic became a dynamic factor determining all the political situation in every country, the political crisis, the class struggles, the social struggles, the national struggles, the international struggles, the geopolitical confrontations.
La pandemia se convirtió en un factor dinámico que afecta a todas las crisis políticas, sociales, económicas, de lucha de clases, geopolíticas alrededor del mundo.
We cannot grasp this qualitative change, this new challenge of history.
No podemos comprender este cambio cualitativo en la historia y este desafío
with the same routine methods that most of the left use this period all over the world.
Con los mismos métodos que la izquierda venía utilizando durante todo este periodo en todo el mundo.
Most of the left organizations, including the so-called Trotskyist organizations, they do, as the French say, plus on change, plus c'est la même chose. More things change, more it's the same situation.
La mayoría de los partidos de izquierda lo que dicen es como dicen los franceses, mientras más cambia la situación, más igual es a lo que yo digo.
And they repeat the same and the same routine.
Y repiten una y otra vez la misma rutina.
And which is nothing more than an adaptation on the liberal capitalist order which is collapsing.
Lo cual no es nada más que una adaptación al orden liberal que está colapsando.
We cannot grasp the change. We cannot grasp the challenge of history today.
No podemos comprender el cambio y el desafío que tenemos
without the theory and the practice of the permanent revolution.
Sin la teoría y la práctica de la revolución permanente.
Which is not just a few programmatic words, it's not just a strategy for underdeveloped countries as most of the people think.
Que no es solamente una estrategia programática para los países subdesarrollados como muchas personas creen.
The permanent revolution that Trotsky developed first in our epoch, it is the conscious reflection of the unfinished historical process of the imperialist epoch of declining capitalism.
La revolución permanente, la teoría que desarrolló Trotsky, es un entendimiento, un reflejo de la situación histórica a nivel mundial de una época de bancarrota capitalista.
La reflexión consciente de la época.
Una reflexión consciente de la época.
Eso incompleto de nuestra época. Okay. Trotskyism is not, as many so-called Trotskyists say, including in Argentina, as far as I saw. Trotskyism is not just an anti-capitalist alternative to Stalinism.
El trotskismo y Trotsky no es solamente una alternativa anticapitalista al stalinismo, como muchas veces escuché que se dice incluso en la Argentina.
Which try to merge with new class struggles.
que intentan como combinar con otros movimientos de lucha o luchas de clases.
No. The Trotskyism is the permanent revolution to complete the task which started in the October Revolution of 1917, the World Socialist Revolution.
Esto no es así, el trotskismo es la continuidad, la lucha por la continuidad de las tareas abiertas por la Revolución de Octubre de 1917.
We are not just another left current.
No somos solo una corriente más de izquierda.
We have to face this challenge
Tenemos que enfrentar este desafío
by constructing the international founded by Leon Trotsky and his comrades.
mediante la construcción de la internacional fundada por Trotsky y sus camaradas.
The call for the Fourth International comes from the future in the present. It is not an echo of the past coming from 1938.
El llamado de la Cuarta Internacional proviene del futuro, no es un llamado desde el pasado.
We have to do that, and we have to fight in every country and internationally
Tenemos
in
que
this
hacer esto,
situation.
tenemos
Our
que luchar. Se colgó, pero hasta donde dijo, tenemos que luchar a nivel nacional e internacional.
Propongo que pasemos al video, por favor. Porque, ¿no?
Okay. So there is I think that we have to.
A ver, está con algunas dificultades, Savas, la comunicación. Pasamos al video y en todo caso después volvemos.
Okay.
¿Ok?
Gracias, compañeros. Okay.
Thank you very much, Savas. Adelante, vamos con el video.
Queridos compañeros y compañeras, dear comrades, on behalf of the EC, of the Workers' Revolutionary Party of Greece, on behalf of the workers, youth and poor of our country, we send to your May Day meeting our warmest internationalist revolutionary greetings. And we salute in this meeting the international working class and all the oppressed, exploited, discriminated all over the world, fighting back the catastrophe that capitalism in its decline has produced. May Day 2021 is the International Labor Day of struggle for life this year, because from 2020 to 2021, just in 1 year, more than 3 million people are dead because of the capitalist destruction of nature, provoking this pandemic, which created a humanitarian tragedy everywhere. Plus, there is no doubt now that the pandemic of COVID-19 was not just a natural disaster, an asteroid coming from outer space, but it was a product of the destruction of the natural environment by the greedy capitalist enterprises, by capitalist globalization, the breaking down of immunological barriers and the ecosystems. The reason which we had the last 30, 40 years, what the epidemiologists had called the epidemic of the epidemics. Despite the quite early discovery of vaccines, it is very far the end of the pandemic. there is a fantastic mismanagement by nearly all capitalist governments of this humanitarian crisis, of this health crisis. There is a wild competition between the big pharmaceutical companies about the one or another vaccine, spreading skepticism and that obscurantists and fascists try to exploit in this situation. Not only that, but it is for sure that the destruction of or in existence, the non-existence of a real, well-equipped national health services all over the world, their destruction in the last 30, 40 years of so-called neoliberalism created the conditions of loss, of innumerable losses of lives who could be saved under other conditions. There is a slogan in the workers' movement in Greece, only the people can save the people, which is absolutely true and is proved. Because the only line of resistance to this humanitarian tragedy during the whole year, throughout the year, it was the self-sacrifice of hospital workers, of nurses, of medical doctors, without any help, on the contrary, by the states and the governments. So May Day 2021 is a day that we have to fight back all over the world with mass mobilizations to save really the life which threatened by the system itself. So we need the expropriation of big pharmaceuticals. We need expropriation of the patents. We need expropriation of the big clinics, of all the public sector of exploitation of health, and decentralization and planning of all resources to face the danger, to have necessary lockdowns where they are necessary, to have mass testing, tracing, and all the necessary measures which are not taken now, as all the governments all over the world, they try to subordinate health and life to the priorities of the capitalist system, of the capitalist economy. The dilemma, economy or health, is a pseudo-dilemma, it's a fake dilemma. Life has always priority from any economic need. So, May Day 2021 is also the International Labor Day of struggle against the misery spread by the capitalist crisis, which led to the pandemic, and through the pandemic knows now a new, totally new phase. The pandemic, created under the conditions that we mentioned before, has came out of the crisis and triggered another crisis. It is not just a worsening of the previous conditions of crisis. We have a totally, radically changed world situation that we have to grasp it if we want to evolve, to develop the right policies to change the situation and to save life. Already before the pandemic, it was clear that all the efforts done the last decade, 12 years, failed to stop the breakdown, the systemic breakdown of the global capitalism. On the contrary, on the eve of the pandemic, all the signs were that we go again to a deepening, to a new phase of a worse crisis. Then the pandemic did not just create a worse crisis, as we said, it changed it, triggered a new, qualitatively new crisis on all levels, on the levels of the economy, of the economical crisis, of political crisis, of class struggle, of national struggles, of international classes, of geopolitical classes, of wars, and revolutionary situation in one country after another. The central banks and the central governments, both in Europe and America and beyond, took extraordinary measures, far bigger sums of money and heterodox economic measures than what they took after Lehman Brothers, trying to save their system. They don't care about people. They don't care about the life of humankind. What they care, it is not just the profits, but the profit system as a system itself, which is collapsing, simply like that. So they try to save, and they take measures that, for this reason, even recently, not only the newly elected Biden administration, but as well the IMF, the World Bank, the European Central Bank, said that these extraordinary monetary and fiscal measures and policies they will keep it, and they advise every government to keep them indefinitely until the pandemic is under control and the economy will be revived. It will be after the pandemic, as everybody says now, including the centers of global finance capital, will be a pandemic of debt and of bankruptcies in many countries, and particularly in the global south. Even Janet Yellen, former Fed chair, and currently she is the Treasury Secretary in the Biden administration, she said that more than 150 million people new will be under extreme poverty in 2021, this year, because of this huge structural shock given by the COVID-19. If until 2008 there were 20 million people who lost their houses and their countries, and they became migrants here and there to be drowned in the Mediterranean, in the Aegean Sea, or to die in the US-Mexican borders. In the last 10 years, just before the COVID, these 20 million, they became 80 million. Everybody can imagine what will happen to these desperate millions of the global south, were in the new situation under the explosive combination of social misery and health dangers and danger of the threat of death, of mass death, particularly in countries where they have no medical services or they don't have even vaccines. This is a peculiarity of, if you like, the universality of this crisis. The pandemic, it is a global problem. It needs a global solution. Even if all the countries in the global north, in America and in Europe, are vaccinated, if there is a single country in the world which its population is not vaccinated, the problem will be here with new variants, mutations, and expansion of the pandemic. Such a global problem is only a global solution can face it. And these global solutions cannot come from a system which proves to be totally incompatible. We will have a mass explosion of unemployment. We have a mass explosion of disruption of the economic and social life and political life in one country after another in the immediate next period. In the case of the Biden administration, are taken measures that never before were taken. The sums mobilized by this administration, the trillions of dollars, 1.9 trillion first, the recovery plan, another 2 trillion later for rebuilding of infrastructure, etc. are sums which were mobilized by US only in the Second World War. And they say that they will escalate this massive intervention. Some people say, okay, that means this reversal of Reaganomics and what the neoliberalism, or what they call neoliberalism, did in the last 30, 40 years, means that we return back to Keynesianism, to welfare state, to new boom, new full employment, good wages. This is just illusions. Unfortunately, these illusions are very strong among the left, internationally, not only in America. And there is no, the contradiction of the contrary is the following. The Biden administration, which means the strongest part of the US ruling class, like the leadership of JP Morgan, etc., they make this desperate move with these huge sums of money and this huge state intervention, because really, which is the opposite with the Reaganomics, the policies by Reagan were initiated in 1980 to save their system. And this reversal of economics, to go back, is the same time it's impossible to be efficient, to be realized, will destabilize more a system which already is in a process of breakdown. This is the second point that we have to keep in mind in this May Day 2021, and also the implications of this destabilization, this process of global systemic breakdown that we see. Apart from these measures of economic intervention, the use of course, police brutality. Even the conviction of Chauvin, the killer of George Floyd, which was definitely a concession to the Black Lives Matter movement, does not mean, although it was accepted with relief, particularly by, but not only, by the Afro-American population, that does not mean that the police system itself, this weapon of the monopoly of violence in the hands of the bourgeois state, has ended. On the contrary, in the same Minneapolis and in another cities of the same country, police brutality already accumulates more victims, more deaths, innocent deaths, particularly among the most vulnerable population of this country. And at the same time that Biden tries to present himself as a pro-working class, he said kind words for the Amazon workers in mobilization. Despite that, he rejected the increase of $15 per hour of the worker wage. And wages in the United States of America from 1973 not only did not grow, but always they decline. And the mass section of the population lives under poverty. This was also the basis for the reason of the rise of the Trump phenomenon and of the far right, of the fascists. This is a fantastic situation in which we are, in the center of global capitalism, in the center of the global pandemic, in the hegemonic power in the capitalist world. You have this desperate situation in the strongest ruling class. And they try everything. I mean, not only that, the other ruling classes in the world, in Greece the same. We see fantastic police brutality against particularly the youth and the young generation, which is so savagely hit by the crisis of capitalist system. Mass unemployment, no future, is a generation really who was born, particularly those young people who were very young, 12 years ago. They don't have any hope to find a job or really life conditions with some dignity in the next period. Never mind what is in the so-called third world, in Africa, Latin America, or Asia, in the Middle East. For this reason, always you have convulsions and the social explosions and the new revolutionary situations will arise. If in the beginning, in last year, they stopped it, for temporarily this revolutionary movement, we enter now in a new phase. The problem it is that we need also to make, if the situation changed qualitatively, if we are in a new world situation, we have to change as well our theory and our practice as revolutionary Marxists, as Trotskyists, to face the new challenges. You cannot have the biggest, there are a number of traps that you have to overcome immediately. The one it is if we adapt to our national milieu. Internationalism is the only hope for victory and for salvation in such a situation in which we are. It's not just a moral or abstract principle. It's a practical principle for the struggle for life to be successful and victorious. The second, it is adaptation to liberal democracy and bourgeois parliamentarianism. This has destroyed one after another many parties of the far left in Europe, like the MPR, or in your country as well, in Argentina, or in Brazil, or everywhere else. We can see that. The experience that we have 10 years ago with Syriza in Greece, Podemos in Spain, etc., led to disaster, our recipe for disaster. Either we'll have in the next period a catastrophe in permanence or revolution in permanence. Permanent revolution is not a hollow slogan. It's not just a programmatic issue. It is not just a strategy. It is a strategy, it is a perspective, it is a program, but above all, it is the expression, the conscious expression of the deepest objective historic demands of our epoch, a transitional epoch from capitalism toward communism. So for this reason, Trotskyism, despite its fragmentation, its retreats, and all the problems that faced and it still faces, is the hope for humanity. Because it is not an arbitrary construction of a politician of the left. It is the objective self-reflection of an epoch. And when this theoretical consciousness, the highest theoretical consciousness of the epoch, as Trotsky said, meets with the masses, the broadest masses, the far away from any theory, this will be the moment of revolution, the violent inspiration of history, the change of the world. So this is the message for May Day 2021. We have to go forward for the Fourth International and for the victory of the World Permanent Revolution. Adelante, compañeros y compañeras.